If you're working in MedTech and are struggling to make your devices more sustainable, then there's a link in the description for you. Our guest today is Isobel Filipova. Isobel is an expert in sustainable design in medical technology and the founder of her own consultancy where she helps MedTech companies redesigning medical devices for sustainability. With a background in industrial design and medical devices, she has developed a unique approach in the balance of usability, compliance, and environmental impact. Her focus is on transforming single-use devices into more sustainable multi-use solutions. Here's our discussion. Hi, Isobel, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Lucas. Thanks for having me.
So, Isobel, you are an expert for sustainable design in MedTech. What does sustainable design mean in a context of medical device?
That's a big question. I'll try and be succinct. So, sustainable design is more than people understand it. Lots of people are looking at how do we reduce or replace the materials or change the logistics or the packaging. And that's not really what sustainable design means. It means that we need to be transitioning to a circular economy and a circular system where all of the players in that system are linked up and working together. And that takes a lot of collaborative work. And we do this, and that enables us to then reduce the waste, and thereby the money, resources, time, and effort are used to the best of their ability. So for medical devices, we need to be collaborating across that whole ecosystem, from the patients and the healthcare facilities to the OEMs and the raw material suppliers and the regulators, which is, of course, a challenge as well within MedTech. And this is the depth that we need to be looking at to be able to approach this in a way that we can actually then get to producing sustainable medical devices. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So, completely in line with you. I think sustainability needs to be holistic because the word sustainability has a little bit been bastardized to just mean ecology. And it's not. It means sustainability has three pillars: ecology, economy, and social aspects. And translated to MedTech is what I always say is that is good for our pockets, good for the patients, and good for the environment, good for the planet. And if we can combine everything in a holistic way across the supply chain, that's what sustainable design means. Yeah. So when you start redesigning a medical device, what is the first steps you usually take?
The first steps. That's an interesting question. And actually, it comes back to your point just now on those three pillars of sustainability. Looking at the social, the economic, and the environmental is something that we have to have intrinsically instilled within the design team before we even start to solve the challenge that we're facing. And therefore, those first steps are actually getting that knowledge embedded, that we need to be broad and holistic and think about it in a different way. But then when we're getting to the real crux of it, we say, right, this is a device that we have and we want to make it more sustainable. I instantly want to tell everybody, well, let's get rid of that thinking, because actually what we need to do is we need to start again. What's the problem that this product solves? What is the solution that it is giving us in a healthcare setting? And then we find out what that problem is. And then we kind of brainstorm and innovate as to how that problem can be solved in a different way. Or maybe it's in the same way, but in a more sustainable way. And so it's taking the problem right back to its core and answering that what, rather than how do we alter something.
Okay, so it's as I would call it, probably a functional analysis. What should the device do, or what should it solve?
Mm-hmm.
And then you analyze, and then you go from there. So maybe another step back. So a question towards what you just said is, how do you address the mindset of, let's say, the companies you're working with? Because that is what I usually see is we've always done it like that. And then with that, the discussion ends. It's like, we're not going to change anything about the device because change is pain. And that mindset is instilled in so many MedTech companies. And I would wonder how you would address that problem.
You're right. It is a massive pain point for us, and that comes down to that knowledge building again. So when I work with companies, I like to start with a knowledge building exercise where we go through a number of different subjects where we talk about where the business is, what the business is doing, where it needs to get to from a standards and regulatory perspective, but then understanding what the opportunities are. And I think one of the biggest challenges that every industry, but especially MedTech, faces is that they see sustainability as a nice to have or the right thing to do. And they don't actually understand that it's got a business case behind it. And if you do it correctly, if you do it in the right way, then you actually are going to see far more input financially because of what you're doing. You're going to be spending less money, you're going to be making more money, and that's ultimately what it all comes down to, is profitability. And if you are doing sustainability right, it means that you are being more profitable, and it shouldn't cost you money.
Yeah, so that's also what they say is like sustainability is probably the best long-term strategy you can ever have
Yeah,
because it is like if all three pillars are in line, good for the planet, good for the patient, and good for our pocket, what more do you want from your company? That's the perfect
absolutely.
alignment, and you will see market success with that. What I often see is that sustainability is seen as marketing, number
Yes,
one, or number two is at best it's seen as compliance,
yes.
and we need to do it, and therefore it's like this unwanted homework that you just need to do in order to not get or to fly under the radar of the regulator,
Hmm.
and therefore it is not seen as a top priority, especially like in these times where you have trade wars and all that stuff going on. That is very challenging. So how do you address that sustainability is often perceived as costly?
It is an interesting one. It is a box ticking exercise. People perceive it as, oh, it's another thing we have to do, and they're not seeing it as the opportunity that it really is. And that comes with, from what I just explained, coming on to talking to not just that maybe the design team that I'm assigned to as a consultant, but to the whole business. So I work and talk to CEOs, investors, shareholders, right at the top of the tree, all the way down to those people on the shop floor, because everybody's got a different angle, everyone's got a different perspective, and they all have different ideas as well, which is absolutely gold sometimes. But they also need different persuasions. So, one of the keys that I have found to unlocking the potential is to be able to listen to what people want and what their challenges are. And when you're looking at sustainable solutions, you can solve not the whole wide world, but you can solve everybody's challenge if you do it well. So, from the shop floor, we're making all this waste, or I'm, running these injection molding machines this many times a day, and we've got staffing issues, right up to how do we support our shareholders to have confidence in us and that we are future proofing our business. And if you're doing sustainability right, you can answer all of those questions.
Yeah. Okay. So let's make a note of what you just said. It's like everybody has their concerns and their personal challenges. They want to do the right thing, but you'll also have to address what let's say their personal daily challenges are and what is hindering them in doing a better system or a better device or a more sustainable system, let's say,
Hmm.
because that's going to tie in like in the question afterwards. But before, I want to just address, like, first you do the functional analysis and then you try to build some knowledge in the organization about what sustainability is about, and what do you do then?
Okay. So, yeah, so it's probably really the other way around. So we start with the building the knowledge, and then they come to me and they say, we've got this product that we want to make more sustainable. And in their mind, they'll be thinking, we're going to replace materials, we can reduce our logistics, we can change our packaging, we can recycle it, which of course we know reality is we can't really recycle medical devices. And so we've done the knowledge building, we've got people on board, we've got people energized, and then we start to innovate and we sit down and we pull that problem apart. So we pull apart what the current solution is, what it does, and why it does it. And also, one of the most important things is who it does it for, because there's so many different needs within the healthcare sector. You might have day patients, you might have long-term illness patients who need long-term medication needs. And so you need to understand what the product is serving to be able to make those next changes. So from that point, we are doing that analysis, as you say, that functional analysis, to understand what the product does and how we can solve it in a different way. And then we throw away the playbook. So when everybody says, oh, you can't do this because of this regulation, or you can't do that because of that standard, we say, let's just forget it. Let's be 5 again. And actually, let's start from scratch. So we're taking that problem, we're figuring out, looking at the whole system, where we're understanding the regulators, we're understanding the healthcare sectors, we're understanding the patients and everything that glues all of that together. We're then looking at how we can create a solution for that problem that supports each of those different factors along the way. And we start to innovate and we start to dream and create crazy ideas of products, and then we bring it back in. And it's just like any design process. You go wide, you bring it in. You go wide, you bring it in, and you keep doing that until you get to a solution that works.
Okay. How does, let's say, customer feedback tie into that? Because it's like you make a variation and then something that is radically new sometimes will fail just because of reasons, because the world doesn't, you cannot tell the world what reality is, it will tell you. So, like if you make these variations with these crazy ideas, how do you test it basically? If you're working in MedTech and are struggling to make your devices more sustainable, then there's a link in the description for you.
How do you test it? It's a really good question. You've got to get out there and you've got to give it to people. You've got to do your trials. You've got to do your market research, and market research is a massive key here. Being able to put it in front of healthcare professionals who are going to be using it, or in front of the patients who are going to be using it, and getting them to test it and play about with it as a concept. And this is, early stages. It might be a cardboard model, you know, just to start getting a little bit of feedback as to how it works and how a customer or a user interacts with it. And from there, you go back and you iterate, and you go again and you iterate, and you go again and you iterate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, what comes to mind is like, the Lean Startup framework from Eric Ries. That's like one of my favorite books. It's like you just make an minimal viable product.
Mm-hmm.
That term has permeated through like all innovation culture. It comes from the Lean Startup. That's like where it comes from. So what you do is like you make something that you're embarrassed of showing someone, and then you show it to them, and then you gather feedback, because
Yeah.
there's a lot that you didn't know that has to go in there, and how it's basically used, and then you gather feedback back from there, and then you iterate. It's all about variation and then iteration.
And it's the same with any innovation. If you look at anybody coming to the market and they're a startup, they're going to have fumbled many, many times before they get to a product that's ready to be funded to go into production. And that is the design process. That is what we do. And a lot of what most people see is what comes out of the door. They don't understand the process that goes through, that a design team go through to get to that product that you see at the shows. That even if it's still just a concept at a trade show, it's still gone through masses of iterations, and there might be internal testing that happens. So I once worked on a bloodletting project, and so we had an arm, one of the dummy arms that they practiced phlebotomy on. And so we were testing it ourselves, seeing how it worked, and thinking about what the challenges were, not necessarily being expert phlebotomists by any means, but it enabled us to iterate and iterate until we got to a point where we could use it. And then we tested it with those experts in bloodletting. So it's that development that you need to be working along.
Yeah, I think it's like the Japanese term is itsugenbutsu, which comes from lean manufacturing, and it means like get your shoes on the floor, on the shop floor, and go see for yourself.
Yes. And working in siloed situation, working in we're going to design this thing and we're going to make it amazing, and it's going to cost this much and it's going to be made out of this. You've just wasted 2 years of your time and hundreds of thousands of pounds in the medical industry. Yeah. It's a complete waste of time. You've got to get it out there. I'm totally with you. You've got to get it out there straight away and get people interacting and feeding back, because that's going to give you so much quality data to feed from.
Yes, 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 yes. Because what I also see is like many people run with heuristics. It's like our brains are also organized in a very sustainable way. So they want to use, or our brain wants to use the least resources needed in order
Hmm.
to make quality decisions. Because brain power is actually very expensive. Like from a space and energy perspective, it's brain energy usage is one of the biggest caloric inputs in our whole body. So what we do is like we create mental shortcuts, and sustainability is littered with, pun intended, with those heuristics, because it's like, yeah, paper is better than plastic, and then you just use paper, and if you do the LCAs, you see, oh yeah, there's a lot of more land and water and whatever use,
Hmm.
and you see, yeah, actually, it's not that really that much better. So how do you challenge that you go just with heuristics and then in the end make your device worse than it was before?
That's a really good point and a really good question. This is a lot of the work that I do in those knowledge sessions, is that myth busting. So where you see companies touting, we've got the most sustainable packaging, we've got sustainable packaging because we use cardboard, whereas their original competitors were using plastic. But that's not actually better. So I think it was one of the UK farm to kitchen food suppliers. So you order a a vegetable and fruit box or a meal box, and they used to do it all with cardboard boxes, and they finally did a life cycle assessment and realized that if they used reusable plastic tubs, it was more sustainable. Not just looking at the plastic reduction, which is where people get stuck, but they were looking at the whole life cycle, and they were looking at all of the different indicators with impact indicators within that. And that then enabled them to see that actually the best solution for this problem is these plastic bins that are reused however many times they are able to reuse. I don't know what the number is, but when I saw that, I was like, yes, people aren't just going cardboard's more sustainable. And you've got to think about it from the other perspective of, glass bottles rather than plastic bottles. If you've got, a soft drinks company who's always used plastic bottles and they're trying to become more sustainable, and they go, so we're going to use glass. Well, it's really not better, because first of all, you've got extra transport because it's so much heavier. You can fit less in each box because they're so much thicker, or you fit less liquid inside it. You've then got the recycling of that glass, the temperatures and the energy that is required to take glass from being a bottle into its raw material and back into being a bottle is astronomical. If you compare that to creating a plastic bottle and throwing it away, I mean, the plastic wins 10 times over. So it's actually about really thinking about every different section. It might be, plastic in one area, glass in another area, cardboard, or, all of these different sections need different materials because of their individual product life cycles. And it's that life cycle thinking that's going to get us to the right answers. And so back to your original question, which was how do you get the people in the organizations to understand this? You have to give them those examples. You have to give them case studies of companies that have done it wrong, or governments who have sanctioned certain rules and requirements, such like in the UK, single-use plastic bags are banned. Well, that's all very well, but now everybody just buys the 10p or 20p bag for life, which is 10 times as much plastic goes into that. It takes 10 times as long to break down, and everyone's got the same amount in their larder. So, that's not helped the situation at all, actually. And so it's thinking about the consequences of what you're changing, and that's another factor that I always bring into it. What are the unintended consequences when you're looking at this?
Yeah, I mean, that's completely lovely that you say that and that you defend plastics, because plastics is usually the bad guy. And
It's not.
yeah,
Plastic is an amazing product. It is a magic material. The trouble is we use it wrong.
yeah. I mean, we have a lot of medical plastics that are just like burned at the end of life, and that would be quite good to recycle. But let's get into that later. I just
Yeah.
want to mention that there's Chris DeArmit, Dr. Chris DeArmit. I had him on the podcast, and he's I think it's like his hobby or like at this point, probably his life mission to defend plastics from bad reputation. And he wrote 2 books about it, and those are amazing. So you should check it out. It's, I think, Phantom Plastics is his company, and then he has Shattering the Plastic Illusion is his most recent one, where he basically does all this myth busting for plastic. So he has all the data, and read like, I think, a few hundred peer reviewed studies about plastics, and he's myth busting all over the place. So he's a good
Amazing.
guy to follow. Then I think what you then do, and you indicated that, is that you're looking to change from a, let's say, single use scenario into a more multi-use scenario. Is that correct? And explain
Yeah.
how you would do that.
Okay, so we would take so most of the products that we're going to be looking at in reality are single-use devices, and a lot of this fashion, let's say, came along over the last number of years. It started initially with the regulations for sterilization, sanitation, making sure that the infection rates were reduced, which is obviously massively important, and that is not something that should be seen as a small thing, and it's something that we have to make sure that we are on top of, and if anything, doing better at with new solutions. But with that came the explosion of single-use devices. Single-use devices started off as a need to have in certain areas, such as syringes, for example. And it turned into, well, we can make everything quicker and faster and cheaper than if we're using reusable devices and having to sterilize them. And that's the challenge that we face now, is how we go about not going back to the 1950s, but how we go forwards using that knowledge that we had and understanding how we transition away from this need for single use. So it's understanding it doesn't have to be every single component of a device that becomes reusable. It's which parts can become reusable. So, for example, if you're looking at an auto injector, they are engineering pieces of dynamite. They are absolutely amazing. I'm not going to say they're over engineered, because they're not, because they have to be as safe as they possibly can be. And I know the work that goes into creating those devices. And the trouble is that the amount of energy that goes into creating that device for one-time use could very easily be transitioned into it being used multiple times and a component of that device being changed. And that's where we have to look at how we develop products. So we need to look at that product, and we need to think which part has to be changed, which part needs to be sterile every single time, to the standards of current, what people perceive as FDA or whatever cleanliness. But which parts of those actually don't need to be, which parts can be reused, remanufactured. For example, the housing, for example, the spring, for example, the components that connect those parts together with the button. It's a case of which parts can be reset and reused that don't even need sterilizing necessarily, depending on its use case scenario, and how do we then transition that product that is currently fully single use into something that is mostly reusable, maybe with a single use component.
Okay, because like here I'm gonna pull up the note that you said before. It's like every stakeholder has their, let's say, their daily lives and their daily routines that they're following and their concerns about the device. And in physicians, it's they're struggling with skilled labor issues. So physicians and other healthcare professionals have to do more procedures in the same amount of time. So convenience and time saving is massively important. That's also why that, and let's name it, COVID has contributed to a very large degree that these single-use devices are basically conquering the market, basically. And now the question is how do you address the convenience problem and the speed problem? Because if I have to reprocess, number one, I have to have in my hospital a reprocessing unit that has to have a quality system. Someone has to take care of it. So if I'm a very small hospital, I cannot afford that. I cannot afford the people, so I don't have it. So I use single-use devices. So how do we address this from a, let's say, holistic perspective to be as fast as single-use and still more sustainable? And then there's also like the cost factor. How do you address this? Do you enjoy the podcast? Then subscribe and rate it on your platform. And join the discussion on LinkedIn. Your feedback and comments help us improve the podcast and bring relevant topics to you. Let's form a better world with plastics.
Great question. This is one of my bread and butters. This is because this is one of those challenges that you hear a lot from many, many stakeholders across the ecosystem, whether it's the doctors, whether it's the other healthcare professionals, whether it's the patient that uses a device at home. This comes down to design. I could basically drop the mic there. I mean, this is about how do you create a system which works. And there are many systems. So let's think about the universe, right? We've got a galaxy inside inside the universe. You've got all of these different layers. It's like an onion. And so the challenge that we're talking about now is the very core of that onion, right? So it's that middle system of how a patient or a user uses this product and how it circulates around, and then you go outside of that and how it fits into the wider system of healthcare. And actually what you just asked touches on both of those. So designing a product, and this is where that iteration and those prototyping and that market research is so important, because you've got to get that feedback across every stage of the use of this product, and every touch point that it makes from raw material all the way through to end of life. We need to understand those touch points and understand what everybody's challenges are within that, so that we can reduce the use steps. And actually, if we just put it down to use steps, using a reusable device or a remanufactured device over a single use doesn't have to have more than maybe one more use step. And it could actually have the same amount, maybe less. I don't think I've got to one that's got less use steps. But if you take a use step as opening the packaging and another use step as throwing it in the bin and emptying that bin, well, you could reduce that down to one use step, because you just put it into a recycling box, which is then collected at the same time as your waste would be collected, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So it comes down to the design ultimately. So going back to what I was saying earlier, you look at your problem, you create your solution that is different in whichever way works for that problem, and then you design in the usability. And so usability is another one of those words that's used correctly, I think, but people don't understand that there's usability in different factors. So usability, from how easy is it to push down your injector device, or how easy is it to do up a buckle. Another usability factor that we have to think about is that process of the user actually interacting with the product through those use stages. And so that's another thing that we're looking at when we're designing. We're designing the product, we're designing the system it sits within that circle, that initial circle, but also the challenges that they face with the current design and how a reusable system could mitigate those challenges.
Okay. So one other question that comes to mind when you're talking about remanufacturing and the usability is, you said we're going to throw out the playbook, but unfortunately, the MDR is the playbook or the FDA requirements, and throwing those out doesn't go as well if you want to approve something. So how do you handle the regulatory challenges when going for a reprocessable device? Because the reason why many manufacturers don't do it is because it's a hassle to do it from a process and validation standpoint. If you say that you can remanufacture, reprocess the device 10 times, you'll have to prove it. And that is quite the effort in terms of testing. So therefore, that is one of the arguments to go for single use. How do you approach that?
Okay, so going back to throwing out the playbook, that's in the iteration, that's in the innovation stage, right? The concept stage. You've got to start with a blank page, because I've worked with groups of engineers and they say we can't do this because we can't do that because. I say, okay, forget all that. Let's focus on what we could do if the world was our oyster. And then as we go through those iteration stages, we bring it back in. We bring those, okay, but what does the FDA say about that? What do the regulations say about these things that we're trying to do? And actually, what is the crux of that? So, for example, materials. This is your bag, right? So I say to people, why can't we use regrind within our manufacturing processes? So regrind is when you have excess from the sprues and scrappage from the material, from the product production, and you've got the scrap that comes out. Why can't we reuse that, put it back into the machine and go again? And we can actually, but the answer that I was given, well, we can't because it's contaminated. We can't because this. We can't. We get 7 or 8 why we can't, and it all comes back to that's what the regulation said. So I found the regulations, and I found the line in the regulations that said that you couldn't use recycled or a recycled material. And actually, what the regulation says is that you have to trace it. It has to be traceable back. But if you look at tracing back a virgin material, it only goes one step to the actual supplier. You don't have to trace it back to the hole it came out of in the ground. And so you can trace a recycled material further back than you can a virgin material. And if you're reusing it in-house, then it's not going anywhere. It's just going around in a tiny little loop. What you do then need to be contemplating is the properties of those materials. Once they've been through the injection molding machine a number of times, obviously the materials will change. Mm-hmm. But I did see a presentation on that at PharmaPack a number of years ago, which they had tested and tested and tested, and they were getting no change with tent reuses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're deep in my favorite topic, recycled materials and plastics. Yeah, that's my world. So I just recently, I think, like, both of the YouTube videos I just recently put up was like just what you just said. Is number one is how do you get to the requirements, and that's what you described. It's like we're gonna challenge everything, and we're gonna be like broad and then bring it in. And one point I was trying to make is that you have to challenge your requirements, because if you're just like, because I said so, that's an opinion and that's not a requirement. Yeah. And opinions shouldn't be requirements. And so what you have to do is you'll have to be like a little persuasive, because if you just go like head on and no, that's not like that, you start litigating and you'll lose, because sometimes decision makers have opinions and then you're going to lose. Usually the one that I most often find is the voice of the customer in the company, because the customer wouldn't want this. And it's like, how do you challenge that? Is you ask the question, how do you know that? That is not, if you ask why, that's a little too offensive, because the question why usually is associated with like justifying yourself. But how do you know that? Like in a curious way. It's like, yeah, one customer once told me that he wouldn't want that. That's not
15
enough.
15 years ago.
That's not enough data. So the real question would be, so customer data clearly indicates that they wouldn't want that. So for example, like color changes, because like recycled materials tend to have black spots or tend to have like different colors or a little bit of a variation. Is it really that important for your application? That's the question. And then they say, customer data clearly indicates that this is the case. Okay, how do you know that? It's like, we did a survey once with like 500 physicians, and it was clear that like optics and how it looked and what color it has, it clearly had an impact on people buying or not our devices. And that's an important point, because you want to sell those devices, because you want to make people's lives better. But usually that is not the case. So it's just like, we can't use recycled materials. How do you know that? Because of regulatory requirements. How do you know that? Yeah, it is in the MDR. So how do you know that? I do not know where it exactly is. Okay, go and read. And then you go and then you see that recycled materials is never mentioned. It says a material has to be safe and effective. Okay, like just like virgin. So if you can make sure that your device is safe and effective, you can use it. So for crutches, you can use a recycled material. There's just no risk. The risk is that the crutch breaks, and that you can make sure with mechanical testing that this is the case. On the other hand, like, this is an example I always use, and people are probably sick of it, and I'm getting sick of it, but I'm going to repeat it until people get it, is implants. You will never use recycled materials for implants, because there's like 5-ish companies that are producing implantable plastics and say you can use my plastic to be implanted. And they charging basically gold for it. And all other plastic manufacturers say, no, we do not dare that you can implant our materials. So you will never go there with recycled materials. But there are certainly applications where you can use them, like handles for surgical devices, crutches, stuff like that, where you do not have a lot of patient contact. There's less risk, and you can live with the requirements, but you have to challenge them, because if you over require, you over engineer, and over engineering always goes into cost and ecological footprint. Yeah. So rant over.
I'm with you 100%.
Good. How you address the fear of instability when you have these multi-use devices?
Again, that comes down to your design and your system. It's all about, so I think one of the things that we have to get past in the thinking is that we're designing a device and it's independent on an island, and I've done my job and I've solved the problem. That's not it. When you're looking at sustainable design and sustainable futures and circular economies, everything is connected, and you have to design in a way where everything is connected. So therefore, when you're looking at those reusable devices, there's never going to be a fear of sterility, because the part that matters is going to be sterile. And you have to be looking at these use scenarios. You have to be brainstorming, how is this going to be used? And I was looking at a device a while ago and working with a design engineer, and we said, well, what about this? And we were like, this is a great idea. Now let's put that drawing on a blackboard, ultimately. Well, it was a whiteboard, but there we go. Let's put that into different use phases, use scenarios. What if it is a ward in a hospital with geriatrics? What if it is a ward in a hospital with children? What if it is in an emergency room setting? What if it is in a hospital, in an ambulance? And we then took this product and we tried to understand how it would work in all of those different use settings. The product was going to be used for the same thing, but you were either on the go, you were in a vehicle, you were surrounded by geriatrics, which was actually the easiest one, because they just are fairly quiet and, well, probably not that docile, but easier than kids screaming around in a ward. And you have to then think about what comes with that. Do we need a separate sharps bin, for example, for that to go into? And how do we then empty that sharps bin into the right place for it to then go into remanufacturing? So I think the answer to your question is it becomes multifaceted, and that's why you have to think of design in a different way. You're not thinking about it of it's just engineering a amazing piece of technology or an amazing device. You're actually designing and engineering the system within which it works, and that device then becomes a part of that.
Yeah. I think another challenge that comes to mind is, like, as you said, everything is connected. And if everything is connected, you get the issue that you do not have subject expertise in all of the areas, and then you need to either involve the subject expert, which adds a member to your team, which adds, like, for every team member, one connection that needs to be communicated across. And there is this thing in, I would say, like, startup culture. I think also Amazon runs it like that. It's like the 2 pizza rule. It's like, or the 1 pizza rule. If you can get like a big family pizza and everybody has had enough, that's like the team size you should have. It's like 5 or 6 people for a design team. Because if you do 20, 30 people, it's like
too much.
The communication will take up so much time, and the alignment will take so much time that you can't get work done. So that's the problem. So how do you balance that in terms of, like, design team, that you have enough knowledge to get the thing done and to think holistically in the system, and on the other hand, that you do not just, like, communicate with each other without any output?
Okay, that's a really good one. So I've written down on my notebook collaboration, but actually we need to go to before that, because what it comes down to is having somebody on the team like me, perhaps, who has a lot of these touch points, who has a good knowledge of the challenges that are faced and the solutions that are out there, that can bring to light for the design team what they need to be considering. I'm not saying that any one person can have all the knowledge available, certainly not across all of the different product categories that there are in MedTech. But once you've got a view of how the system works and how the interaction between those systems works, you can start to bring that holistic thinking into a design team in a way that gives that design team enough knowledge and recognition of the challenges and those interactions to be able to design a suitable system or a suitable product to go within the system, which you can then take to the experts or to those people on the ground, such as the doctor or the waste recyclers or whatever it is that is the challenge in your system. You can then take it to them directly and get their initial feedback. So when we talk about earlier with the market research and getting those devices in front of healthcare professionals or patients, we also have to get those sorts of devices in front of waste collectors and reprocessors and all of those people across the life cycle of that product, because they all have to we have to make sure that it works for everybody. And absolutely, it's right that we should have our main focus on the patient, because patient safety and health and well-being is the most important thing, and it's why we're all here. But as a part of that, a lot of impacts on health come from the environmental impacts that we are causing, not just us in the health sector, but in the health sector, we contribute 4 to 5% of the impacts internationally. So, we have to be thinking about, we're causing this impact, which is causing health issues. So we need to think about how we change that. So it then becomes that collaboration piece. So you have somebody who's got a broad expertise, a broad knowledge base of different areas and processes within a system of delivering a piece of healthcare. You then have the experts of the design engineers to brainstorm and to engineer and to work out how we solve that problem. And then we go to those users and we test it with them. Much like we don't have a patient on our design team. We don't have a doctor on our design team. Same thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think what Google calls it is like T-shaped people. Know a little about a lot and then have one area of expertise that you really, really need. And so that when you know enough about another topic so that you know when to involve
Other people.
another expert. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you very much for those insights. It was very, very interesting. But let's get a little bit to the personal part. You just recently started your own consultancy. What motivated you to take that step, and how has your journey been so far?
What motivated me to go independent? Well, I think that for me, I feel there is so much opportunity across so many different businesses to make a real difference, that I don't want to be stuck in one organization. And I want to be able to share my knowledge with as many people as I can. And this is one of the struggles. If you've met anybody who works in sustainability, we put the weight of the world on our shoulders. I try very hard not to put the weight of the world on my shoulders and take one step at a time. But the reality is, I want to help as many companies get to where they need to be as possible. And it's not about, of course, it's about reducing the environmental impact, but it's about helping them to understand that if they do it right, they will future proof their business and mitigate the risks that will be coming around the corner. And so that's why I have started on my own, because I can give my knowledge and expertise and insights to more companies.
Okay. Yeah, it's not that for me. I clearly have an authority problem, so I don't need a boss.
Sometimes it'd be quite nice to have a boss to, give me the contacts so that I know who to speak to. But, as you well know, when you work on your own, when you're an independent consultant, you've got to do it all. You've got to be your marketing, you've got to be your sales, you've got to be your accountant.
Yes, that's true. Sometimes, that makes you a little bit of a T-shape person. Like, a lot about, a little about a lot. And then you have like what you actually want to do. And sometimes it feels like it just holds you back from doing what you actually love. But, like in a corporate setting, you also have like, I say stuff that you don't want to do, like a bunch of meetings that you shouldn't be in,
Yeah.
and a bunch of compliance trainings that are like, yeah, I could have skipped that. I know that I know a lot of that stuff that it shouldn't be done. It's just like how to cover your ass in case of a lawsuit for corporates. So yeah, I think in the end I love it very much. And how do you enjoy it so far to be your own boss?
Yeah, it's good. It's challenging. I'm not going to lie. It is challenging, but I like that I can really get to the core of people's problems and I can really help them in the way that I want to help them. And you're not then constrained. I mean, of course, you're constrained in a different way, but you're not constrained by your boss or your boss's boss or your
Mm-hmm.
boss's boss's boss saying, no, you can't do that.
Yeah,
Or I don't want to listen. When you're working for a company as an external, you have that opportunity to go in and be the voice of authority ultimately. And that, even within when you're going into consulting jobs rather than employed jobs, you still need to get the whole business on board, because it might be the CEO doesn't have a clue that the design team has hired a consultant to do what it is that I do. And so you've still got to get them on board, because it's that transition piece across the whole business.
yeah. Yeah. So I compare the to be a self-employed as to being a little bipolar. So your whole emotions are tied to your business, and if it's going well, you're like, I'm on top of the world, I'm the best. And then if you like have a problem, so I just I had recently my accounting software got hacked, and you couldn't write invoices. That's like
Oh,
straight like that's hard surgery for you. So that's
yeah.
threatening as self-employed. Self-employed. If you can't write invoices, that's not good. So it's like you're always a little bipolar, and how your business goes is very lot tied to your personal emotions. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges, to regulate your own emotions. As easy as that sounds.
Yeah, it is a challenge. And I think that for me, it's a case of, when you get pushed down for something, or you get a no, I know that I'm still doing the right thing. I know that what I do, I love, and I know that it's needed, and that drives me forwards every single day. And it's almost amazing, that there is that drive to just keep going in the face of whatever people throw at you. You just manage to keep plodding on, and we'll get there eventually.
That's a very nice quote. Good. So let's come to the final question. What advice would you like to give to our listeners that want to work towards a more sustainable medical design?
Okay, so I think that I'm going to sum up a little bit what I've mentioned a couple of times: is go back to being five and get those crayons out. Start with that initial problem and figure out what you're actually trying to solve. What are you actually trying to solve? And then go from there. The other thing that I think I would want to give advice on is solutions that people will see already on the market. So I don't want them to be sidelined by, or distracted, should I say, by suppliers who are selling you the dream. So a material supplier, I'm not digging at you, Lucas. A material supplier might try and sell you the dream of, this is an amazing product. It's 70% reduction in your carbon. It won't be, I can guarantee. And so I think my point is, don't be greenwashed. Don't be greenwashed. You have to have the knowledge and the expertise internally to understand what these suppliers are trying to sell you and what output it's actually going to give you. And I mean, I spent a long time looking at material solutions in previous projects, and it's it's a minefield. It is an absolute minefield. And actually being able to measure them against each other is nigh on impossible, because everybody is calculating their impact of their material on a different scale, and therefore you can't measure them against each other. So don't be sidelined by your suppliers. It's got to go deeper than those surface adjustments. It's not just about your material, your transport, your packaging. It's about the core product. What does it do? What is your problem? And then opening that onion up to all of those different systems.
Okay, perfect. Isobel, thank you very much for your insights. Do you have any last words?
I think that one last thing I'd like to add or reiterate is that this is a business need, and that businesses have got an opportunity to future-proof, to retain and onboard customers and clients, to become the leaders in their industry by doing it right, building their reputation. And then really it's also about mitigating that risk from standards and regulations. It takes 8 years to get plus or minus 8 years to get a medical device on market. And for example, in the UK, the NHS is putting a timestamp of 2045 on it. And so that's 2 rounds of product, if you're lucky.
Yes.
So, you've got to get cracking, and you've got to get cracking now. And if you want to be providing, for example, the NHS with those regulations, you've got to get going quickly, because you've got a lot of products to develop in that time. And there is support out there that can help you with that, and really understand how to do it right, rather than just do that surface approach.
Okay. Thank you very much, Isobel, for coming on. That was Isobel Filipova, and until the next time.
Thank you very much, Lucas.
If you're working in MedTech and are struggling to make your devices more sustainable, then there's a link in the description for you.